Okay, I'm doing that. Now it should show recording, and I go to screen share. Then we can start. Okay.
Right.
Good enough?
Right.
Yeah, very good. Very good.
Okay.
Now we are ready to start. I would like to welcome everybody. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Allahumma zidna ilman wa alhiqna bis salihin.
Amen.
So, inshallah, we will continue this way, our regular seminars. I'm glad that Necati Aydın prepared this presentation for us. I would like to first introduce him. Dr.Necati Aydın is professor of economics. I'm sure you already know, exploring well-being and moral economy from a multidisciplinary perspective. And currently he is teaching at 100. Yıl University in Turkey. He has 2 doctoral degrees, one in education and the other in economics. He worked as a researcher in the US for a decade, completing over 40 research projects before embarking on his academic career. He has authored 9 books, translated 2 and co-authored 3 books, and published many peer-reviewed articles also. He has so many things in his credentials. He has published also several articles within the Islamic moral economy based on Ustaz Nursi's writings. And then last year, you probably received a copy of this book that came out through Routledge, titled Said Nursi and Science in Islam, Character Building Through Mana Harfi Approach. He also has another recent book published with the title 3 Dimensions of Happiness, Pleasure, Meaning, and Spirituality. And also, I'm sure most of you already know, he is the project leader of science workbook series based on the Mana Harfi approach. Inshallah, soon we are hoping that the first volume of that will be published soon. He is also founding member of the Nursi Society, and this is the activity that is mainly sponsored by this society. He currently serves as a vice president of the society also, and I have pleasure of introducing him on a series of seminars, inshallah, that will continue. Okay, Necati Hocam, now the floor is yours. Please go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it's really interesting to have such an introduction. When you talk about Ana, I will say, Ustaz will say the brief introduction will be like Ana Abu La Shay. So which basically means that, you know, I am the father of nothing, because in Arabic you introduce yourself as a father of someone. So in a sense that indeed, you know, anything that is, you know, that we appear to have, it's not ours. So in a sense that that's only blessing to remember, to be thankful for those given to us. But let's me again start with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi kulli ajma'in. Eid Mubarak to everyone. And it's really a great Eid for us to have such a great occasion. And to, I will say, you know, I've been reading Risala for over 30, I think 40 years. But in my understanding, when I try to assess Risala, I will say, in my judgment, the most important piece in Risala is Ana Risala, so Anā Treatise. So it's, I think it's.
I'm very sorry to interrupt. Can I please ask everyone to mute their microphones because, you know, there is interruptions happening and it's difficult to hear Necati Hocam.
I think that's a very good point. Yeah. So please, everyone. I think even I might be able to mute everyone. I don't know. Let's see, participants. Yeah, I can mute everyone. Yes. Everyone is muted, I think. So obviously you can unmute yourself when you need to. Okay, I think that's a very good point. Again, I think that's really Ana Treatise, and it's very, very, if it's not the most important, it's obviously a very important piece. And so hopefully today's discussion will help us to further understand that, though it's very important, and I think it's also very difficult to understand, and I think it really needs to have a deep discussion and intellectual discourse to understand his concepts, his ideas in Ana. What we're going to do is mainly try to see how we can reflect on Ana through phenomenological methods. Phenomenology, and again, I have to apologize because this is really an economist education, but I really, I'm not a philosopher, and we have philosophers that are expert in philosophy among us. But actually, I consider myself like, a fresh graduate student in this area, because I think with the epistemology, ontology, phenomenology, particularly for the last, I will say 3-4 years, I have been reading a lot, and mainly through self-educating. And I came to the point that this is a subject area. It's really, yes, it's expertise of philosopher, but I think it is somehow essential for everyone. Anyone who care about knowledge, I feel that it's important to have some understanding in epistemology, ontology. But then I came across to phenomenology, and you'll see that it gave me impression as if this is even the most important field within philosophy, and we want to understand in terms of knowledge. This is the outline of presentation. So first we're going to give some definition with a brief history of phenomenology. Then we're going to talk about give some overview of certain phenomenological concepts, and talks about the phenomenological methodology particularly. And then in part 3, we will start to reflect on certain concepts in Ana, and try to see how those phenomenological concept and methodology can help us to better understand the concept in Ana. That's basically the outline of the presentation. Now, I think, of course, the essential part is we need to start with knowledge. So we all are somehow, maybe we can define ourselves, knowledge labor, that we're working, as a academician, we really try to, everyone gain certain, expertise in a particular knowledge. But the question of really what is knowledge, and how do we know what we know? And we know this is really a subject for epistemology. And what we, in this discussion, we're going to use the definition that used by Al-Pastonoja, actually. They define knowledge as a more general term, and I find it's really acceptable. It's very good. It says knowledge is just all content of mind. Now, all content of mind is knowledge. Now, the question is that, can you have knowledge without mind? So I mean, let's say if you have a machine, robots, or let's say, or cell phone or computer, can they have a knowledge? That's and I think that it's very important to look at that. So again, we have it. So let me see. I need to. Someone still. I think so. Just make sure that it is muted. Let's see. Okay. So the question of really, let's say when you have your smartphone, and we call smartphone, whether really a phone can be smart, I think it's very much debatable. And I will say, if you look from an epistemological perspective, you need to call it dummy phone, because we can't really claim the phone can have a knowledge, because that's all depends on how we define knowledge. If knowledge is basically, storing something, sorting something, searching and finding what is stored out there, obviously you can say, all smartphones are more smarter than any human being. So, but if knowledge requires consciousness, requires, in this case, mind, obviously to claim that something has knowledge, first we have to know that whether this has any in this case, conscious or mind. So, and that's very much really the essence of phenomenological approach as well, we're going to later discuss. So a question of like, can animal have knowledge? You know, again, that I think is worth to think, so we can thought about it. But it seems like when you look from phenomenological perspective, we can only talk about knowledge when we have conscious. No conscious, no knowledge. So knowledge is basically possible conscious, and everything else, it is potential out there. Let's say on your smartphone, it's only become knowledge if you as a conscious being have intention to search this, you know, knowledge and to make sense of it. So obviously, again, how can we, once we define knowledge as the content of the mind, and how can we gain, how the mind gain knowledge? That become very important question. One idea is that the mind basically just gets the, let's say, through the sensual data, have the sensual representation of the data out there. And in this case, that what is in the mind, what is the content of the mind, is just like a copy of what is, let's say, objects out there. When we say, you know, a book, and then we have certain image of book in mind, and that's basically this kind of copy of the actual book out there. That's idea is basically saying that knowledge is representation of, let's say, of the reality out there. But phenomenological approach will actually is against this kind of definition of knowledge. Phenomenology will say no, knowledge is not representational, it is a relation. It's the relation between the mind or the conscious and the object of knowledge, whatever it is. So in this regard, it's quite different in terms of how knowledge itself is actually defined in phenomenology. So we can mainly, I think, in a book as well, we put it knowledge in two categories. Essentially, we call that instrumental knowledge and meditative knowledge. And instrumental knowledge, that again is the knowledge of algorithmic or counting or sorting. That kind of knowledge is really can be stored and can be belong to a machine, or they can have it even if we can call it knowledge. But the knowledge from phenomenological perspective is actually only true knowledge, meditative knowledge, which basically means is relational to the self, to the conscious self. And in this case, you only know something through the conscious self. If you don't have conscious, you don't know anything. There's no knowledge out there. So in this regard, the very definition of knowledge is different in phenomenology. So how we gain knowledge, again, there are, you know, that's the whole field of epistemology dealing with that one. I just want to mention a few things because there are a few key I think, thinkers to understand when we try to understand phenomenology. You know, we're going to mention that Husserl is the founding father of the modern phenomenology, but we can take it phenomenology back all the back way to Plato, and basically. But when we look at it, we can see that David Hume, Immanuel Kant, Descartes, somehow those ideas all are very related, and we somehow have to make certain sense of their ideas to really have a good understanding of the phenomenological approach in modern time. From David Hume's perspective, that's basically what he put the experience at the center of knowledge. And basically he says that we gain knowledge in 3 stages. First, we receive the impression of whatever is out there through sensory experiences. That's whatever, you know, something impress us. That's basically this essential data that we get based on what we experience when we see a nice scene out there or an object out there. The second, he says that we get this impression and then we develop our ideas of impression, something make impression on us, and then we try to develop our ideas of impression, what it is, meaning that we put those data together, this raw data together, build up our understanding of this, you know, impression and what is out there. And then he says that we complete our understanding by connecting our ideas to make sense of whatever that we experience. So essentially, Hume puts experience at the center of knowledge acquisition, and in this case give basically the mind ability or function to put those essential data together that to make sense of what is out there. And and Hume's basically, that's again, when we look at when we read Hume, we see that he is a very interesting guy to basically negate the existence of God, that he spent a lot of time to see how he can negate the causation. And the essential things that he tried to really deal with this one in his idea. And then I will argue that he turned out to give us really a great argument that we can use for the existence of God in terms of negating shirk from his action in the universe. But in his understanding is that basically it's all about our knowledge is based on, what we gain through the impression. And if we don't have any experience of something, we cannot make sense of it. So in a sense that like one easy question that they will ask, they will say, okay, if you are blind, can you really have a dream of anything? So, and as of we know, if you're born blind, you can have a dream. And Hume will say that's because really you don't have any essential data, and you can't really make any things out of, you can imagine about anything because you don't have any essential data to really just to think about it. So in a sense that if there is absolute no essential data, Hume will say that, no experience, nothing, you don't know nothings. And so he's very, in this case, keen on this part. And it's when we know that Kant was very much affected by Hume, but Kant basically pay attention to the mind in terms of its importance of gaining knowledge. And that Kant considered the mind to be the ultimate sense organ that help us to really gain that certain understanding. But the issue with Kant that Husserl's mainly disagree, or in a way that goes beyond Kant, Kant will say that there are basically phenomena, noumena. There is something, an appearance, and what appear to you. And there is something behind appearance. And Kant will say we can only access to phenomena through all essential, data, and that the mind can actually put those mind. And then he will say transcendental ego, that he will use it as kind of hypothetical, entity in human nature. Will put those together and give us such an understanding of what we perceive. But he will say, sorry that you don't even work hard, you can't really have the access to the ultimate reality behind what appears to you. And Husserl will disagree with that. Husserl will say that, no, actually, you can have access to that one. And Husserl come up with this concept and distinguish intuition with perception. He argues that basically intuition is the ultimate understandings or the meaning that you give through the transcendental ego, that when you experience something, and therefore he basically thinks that, Kant is wrong, that Kant is, and he actually considered this to be the greatest mistakes in the history of philosophy, because he says that, that you're basically telling us, you're setting the limit for us, you're telling us that, the reality is out there, we can't really have access to it, we can just speculate and have our perception of really what we perceive. And of course, we know in Kant that he came up with certain a priori, a posteriori concept, and he says, that your mind has a certain a priori knowledge that through which that you can perceive it. Like he will say causation is a priori knowledge that basically he got this from David Hume, the meaning that it is your mind that somehow think everything as a through causal relationship. And he will say that your mind always thinks in terms of time and space, that you cannot really think of anything without space or without time. And he will say, this is really, again, just like, you're born with such mind mode, and that's going to affect your way of perceiving the phenomena out there. Now, phenomenology will say that basically the self is the key at the center of epistemic understanding. So again, it's in modern times, key figures in phenomenology is Edmund Husserl, and then we have again the different phenomenologists. You can send Sartre is on, is ontology side. Heidegger is mentioned, is also ontic phenomenology, a phenomenologist as well. And basically, the idea here is, from their perspective, the phenomenology should be the foundation of all philosophy. Why? Because it provides the key to the human understanding of everything. So in a sense that, if we're going to really mention, if you have to somehow put, phenomenology, ontology, epistemology in an order, Husserl would say without doubt that phenomenology has to come first. Maybe, I don't know, when I look at it, maybe Heidegger might say ontology might come first, then phenomenology will come. I'm not sure. My reading of Heidegger really didn't give me quite clear things, and obviously he puts a lot on ontology, but I don't see whether he can get anything about ontology without phenomenology. So in this case, that basically phenomenology was saying that phenomenology is not just about experiencing an external data. It's actually, when it talks about experience, it's all about the experience of the conscious self. That's all kind of experience, including perception, thought, memory, imagination, desire, all kind of awareness that is part of experience from phenomenologic perspective. So in a sense that it is a consciousness of or about the self and everything else. So that's basically, it's all about, so what is knowledge, or what is phenomenology, is basically the study of the consciousness, or study of the structure of consciousness, or the study of how the transcendental ego basically is conscious of something. And Husserl would say famously that you can't really separate the self from the objects, because the conscious is always conscious of something. So there is really, and he will be very much against of this, concept of the idea of duality, because he thinks that this is a mistake to think that you can really separate the subject and object and say, oh, the subjects, like, the mind is just reflecting on the world. He will say, no, there is no pure mind or consciousness without something's being the content of this consciousness. So it's very much, puts a lot of efforts to really explain how the mind works in this way. So in this regard, we can say that particularly Husserlian phenomenology is a response to Cartesian methodic thought. As we know, Descartes famously tried to, implement or exercise an extreme doubt about the knowledge that he had. And, he basically doubted about everything, because you cannot trust your eyes, you cannot trust your ears, you cannot trust touching, nothing's eventually is really trustable. You can be, all of those senses can be deceivable, can deceive you. So the question is, how can you be sure about anything? As we know, famously, Descartes says that I think, therefore I am. So basically, he says that the only thing I can be sure about it is the doubting mind. So I'm doubting about myself. So I'm doubting, but as I have no doubt that there is the mind. There is some things that doubting about something. So that's thinking self. He thinks that the thinking self is some things that we can be sure about it. The certainty can start from that. Then now we can go and try to, use this mind that we're sure about it. Then we can look at the world and look at the data and basically get them and process them and have established our understanding. And that's basically the duality of the mind and matter. So mind is there, you can be sure of it, and the matter is out there, you can have access through the mind. Husserl will basically be against this kind of duality. Husserl will unite mind and matter, and it will say that you always think of something, and you're always conscious of something, and you can never be conscious of anything. And in this case, you say, I'm not thinking about anything that you're thinking about. I'm not thinking about anything means that you're thinking about, not thinking about anything. So you're still thinking about something. So in a sense that Husserl would say that no, your mind, your conscious can't do it without something. So in this case, he will say it's wrong to separate mind and matter, and to claim that mind is an external observer thinking over the world and get the data, and then you sort it out and try to make the sense. So in this regard, he will, Husserl will strongly argue that there is no objective knowledge without subjective self. So that's very, very a strong argument. And obviously, I think when we discuss, maybe Yunus Hocam can make comment on that as well. I think a certain idea is perhaps becoming more relevant, particularly with quantum physics, that when you have, let's say this, in quantum physics, when the observer is actually affecting the reality, the question of this, Schrödinger cats, that whether the cat is dead and alive, and depending on whether you make a, observation or not, or double slit experiments, in quantum physics, obviously it's telling us that the conscious is directly affecting the reality. So, and that's very much is relevant to what Husserl is saying as well here. So in the sense that we have to define phenomenology, we say phenomenology is basically made of two concepts, phenomena and logos. So phenomena, it's appearance, logos is the study, so it is a study of appearance. But what does it mean? It means that how can we investigate what appears to us to understand what is behind them? So it's not really just, it's not, as Kant will mention, to really look at the phenomena and try to understand the phenomenon only. No, it is, if we have to use Plato's concept, it is phenomenology will be to look at the shadow, that we are all born in a cave, that whatever we see is nothing but shadow, but we can actually reflect upon the shadow to understand what is behind the shadow. So our objective is to really, is not to study the shadow and to seek the shadow and try to describe the shadow. Phenomenology would say is a waste of time, because so what is point to study the shadow? So phenomenology will say that the objective is to really look at the shadow to see whether we can penetrate what is behind the shadow, what is the meaning behind the shadow. So, and that's, I think, when particularly you look at Heidegger, that he seems like he's very much into this one. And I, recently when I read this Heidegger's books on Plato's, caves metaphor, and he, spent all the, the entire book to really make sense of this metaphorical story, to see how phenomenology can really help us to penetrate into the ontic reality behind this, the appearance. So, but in this case, basically, phenomenology is to describe what is given to us in experience, the experience of the transcendental ego, without concealing them through preconception and hypothetical speculation. And there are certain terms actually in phenomenology, they use this one. I will share those with you. So let's see here is that unless, so if we use the Heidegger's term, that everything is actually disclosed, the entire universe, the entire event is just disclosure, is, he will say, is unconcealment. So in this case that we, as he will say, Aydın, as a conscious being, that we basically are experiencing this disclosed activities in the universe or event in the universe, and we are supposed to suspend our, whatever preconception to directly get exposed into this, the meaning of what is going on. So to delve into the reality, to understand really what is happening, mainly go below. So in this case, phenomenology, it seems like play and is very, give us an important instrument, because phenomenology is helping us to understand the structure of human conscious experience. How do we experience what we experience? How are we becoming conscious of something? How does the conscious work? And so that in this case, it's really, it's reflecting upon our immediate lived experiences to make sense of really what is happening around us. So in the ultimate objective is to really to understand the true nature of beyond appearance to, as I mentioned before, Kant, that Husserl will argue that we can have access. I think in my reading of Heidegger, when as a student of Husserl's, he actually gets this idea and try to see how he can penetrate behind the phenomena in terms of the ontological reality, and therefore he puts a lot of emphasis on that part. Now, the history of phenomenology, as you mentioned, can go back to Greek, and particularly Plato's allegory of the caveman could be, I think, very relevant. As I mentioned, that I recently read Heidegger's books on that one. I find it very, very interesting. Again, it's in a modern time, I think when you look at it, the concept was first used perhaps by Hegel, and Hegel, books. The title of his book is actually, one of his books is Phenomenology of Spirit. But then again, we see the concept is well much established by Husserl's and Heidegger's and others. In again, Merleau-Ponty is another one, Sartre is another one. Those are key contemporary figures in phenomenology, basically. And there are two types of phenomenology. One is pure phenomenology, and the other called existential phenomenology. So mainly Husserlian phenomenology is considered to be pure phenomenology. So in a sense that effort here is to understand the essence of pure consciousness, to see how the conscious works. And Heidegger's will, again, in my understanding, Heidegger would take it to really as being perhaps work of Heidegger. And so in this case, he will try to really, he will say it's a forgotten question that we really for the beings, look at the other things, and then he will take us to the being and try to, but he will use the phenomenological method to help us to understand being, and he makes this really the essence of his writing and his ideas. Now, again, in pure phenomenology, that's one key concept is natural attitude. So natural attitude is basically saying that it's just it's just by default that we think that as if we are observer and the reality and subjective experience is separate from each other. And the idea here is that we need to suspend the natural attitude to gain a true knowledge about reality. And I find this one is really very interesting in a sense that, like when Nursi used this concept of ulfa, that when you get this is when you get used to something, what you need to remove, say, or as if you are experiencing for the first time. So you need to go beyond the preconceptions or beyond the teaching at school or by others to get direct exposed to, let's say, a flower or to a star or whatever the things that you're reflecting on. So in that case, basically, pure phenomenology would say that we can only gain true knowledge of reality through delving into our immediate experience of it. That the experience of the ego, the self, is the one that can really help us to go beyond what appears to us, to understand the essence of what we are experiencing. But to do that, they will suggest that we need to suspend our natural attitudes, meaning that, if we just look at everything in an ordinary way as we do it every day, we will not be able to really penetrate into the reality behind that. But then it says, if you suspend the natural attitude, you will experience surprise and you will gain an inner nature of things. That's also, I like the concept I mentioned, you experience the surprise. And actually, I find it in Nursi will say, and everything will become miracle to you. Everything will become amazing. It's a wonderful world and wonderful life. Why? Because now you suspend this natural attitude, and now you're looking, in a different way. So we'll say Anā harfi perspective that will basically help you to penetrate into the amazement of the activity in the universe. So phenomenological reductionism work in the following way. So first, you unpack the phenomena by going beyond the conceptual framework that's given to you. And then you analyze the reality through the subjective perception of, in its purity, that in terms of what am I seeing now? What am I experiencing now? How am I becoming aware of what is in front of me, in the sense that is all awareness of conscious. So then we give the meaning to Aydin's world through the transcendental ego. It's basically, we are, if we use basically, again, Heidegger concepts, that we are the one that giving the meaning to the things that, in this case, and everything means something to us, and the meaning mainly comes through this transcendental ego. When we get this data, we make this relational connection between transcendental ego and what we experience, then we try to give meaning to them. So the ultimate objective is to move from fact to the essence in terms of giving meaning by the transcendental ego. So what in phenomenology, what they mean by the essence is not necessarily the material ultimate essence of reality, because basically they will say it's really, you know, we don't really care, is it the atoms or quark or whatever. That is not, that's what they are really dealing with. What they are really dealing with is that they try to see what is the meaning that we as a subject assign to what we have it out there. Is it, what is this? Is it a shadow? Is it, you know, is it shadow, or is it real cow? You know, and how do you know that? So, and why it's cow, and how you perceive a cow as a, you know, as a subject, or this is something that basically, again, relate to me, that I can, you know, milk it and benefit from that. So that's, again, the meaning that will come from the transcendental ego in this case. So again, the two different concepts in phenomenology, perception versus intuition. So perception is a sensory data of object, while intuition is the meaning of object through the conscious experience. So that's, I think, is also a very important difference, in a sense that it's not about what you get and what you see out there. It's all about what is the meaning that you ascribe based on your conscious, that basically, again, is through the transcendental ego. So in this case, then again, we have, you know, the reality consists of the objects and event as they are perceived in the human consciousness, not as something independent of human consciousness. So phenomenology will say that no matter what you study, no matter what you do, it can't be separated from the human consciousness. So for that reason, phenomenology will absolutely reject this concept of objective knowledge that is disconnected, or is not linked to the subject or the transcendental ego. I'll say that, you know, no matter what you have it out there, whenever you talk about knowledge, human knowledge is always the knowledge of the subject. And since the knowledge of the conscious, basically first person or subjective views of the first person view of, in this case, that particular experience. And in this regard, phenomenology, particularly Husserlian phenomenology, will introduce this concept of intentionality. We'll say that the conscious is always intentional towards something. So in a sense that you don't really get, you don't see anything until you have the intention of, you know, you're directing your attention to something. So in this case, my understanding of intentionality is you're directing your attention, your consciousness towards something, because there are many things out there. It's basically somehow they are revealing themselves to you. The question for you, what are you looking for? What are you seeking? What are you searching? So, and in that case, Husserl would say that basically your consciousness has this intentionality, that your conscious work with intentionality, and you can look at something based on what you have it, and how you direct your attention towards something that he calls intentionality. So in this regard, when we really look at it, phenomenology, ontology. Ontology is the study of being and what it is out there. Epistemology, as we know, is study of how we know what we know. And logic is study of how we reason. Ethics is how we know what is right and wrong. So in this case, the phenomenology is study of our experience and how we experience. And basically, different thinkers will put each one of those as the most important. But Husserl will say for sure it is phenomenology should come first. And again, when I read Nursi, and so we're going to have a discussion on that one, I don't know. I think so I'm a little bit hesitant that whether we're going to put ontology or phenomenology, but I will again perhaps put it phenomenology first and then put ontology or ontological phenomenology together maybe as a first in understanding out there. So that's against and in one way is how you can relate those different branch of again philosophy to see how they link to each other. We already discussed some of those. So again, I think it's very important to look at Hume, Kant, Husserl to see how the idea conforms, the phenomenological idea conforms. And again, I think given the time limits, we're not going to spend a lot of time on that one. It's on slide, you can go over that. Again, we already mentioned that what is the differences between Kant and Husserl in terms of phenomena and the ultimate access to the reality. Now, one, of course, is certainly intuition in terms of really getting access to the ultimate, reality out there. It's really one interesting part. He will say, yes, he will accept like a Kant that you have a mind that's, governed by certain laws, like let's say a priori laws. But then you'll say that you have a transcendental ego. You'll accept this as well, like Kant as well. But the difference is that transcendental ego is actually that experiencing. Kant will say this is some things only to unify the experience. We need it, but we can't really claim it is out there. We just have to come up with such concept to really give the mind the ability to really put those, unify all this data and put those, piece of the information together to make sense of what is out there. But for Husserl, his argument is that phenomenology and the subjective experience of the self can be universal because it's same for everyone. That we all, as a human being, even though it's what you call subjective, but he will say this everyone as a conscious being that basically see and access the reality in the same way, the same mechanism. But say that we can generalize the result, we can generalize the result of our of consciousness, even though it's subjective, given that what it has similarity to what you experience subjectively, then we can somehow universalize this experience, the subjective experience, and to somehow, again, to generalize and gain some general understanding of something out there. So in this case, Husserl will, my understanding, that he will put subjective, his understanding of subjective experience is different. It's not like it's subjective, it's basically unique to me, that you have no understanding of, no understanding of a pain. No, I have a pain when, let's say, I get injured. You have a pain when you get injured as well. I can have intuitive understanding of your pain through my own experience of a pain. So in that case, we will say, that we don't have to really rely on this empirical, data to claim the universality of certain knowledge and claim that as it's against the modern scientific approach of particularly with positivism, that is anything is empirical, testable and confirmed, that's universal, anything else is subjective, and that's basically subjective is not as a matter, is not something that we can even study in science. But Husserl will disagree with that one, and I think that is one of again interesting things in Husserl as well. So again, it's perception, it's not representation, it's basically is the presentation of the objects to us. So that's, I think, when phenomenologists talks about perception. So it's not about really that you just have the image of what is out there. It is really perception. It means something's out there is revealing itself to you, that you, through your transcendental ego, are directly exposed to this, this show and this presentation. So in a sense that, and therefore, I think if you use, and that's why I really like Heidegger when it comes to this point, he will say, we're thrown into this world and we're being exposed, bombarded with this amazing, experience every moment, in a sense that everything is somehow basically, disclosing themselves to us, and with all this disclosure, there is meaning, and that meaning is basically only possible through the conscious self, that you as the conscious being, that you try to just ascribe or assign meaning to what you experience in this life. So that's basically, in this case, perception. It's very different when you look at it in terms of the meaning in phenomenological literature. So in this regard, we can say phenomenology is more holistic approach of really looking at the reality. So it's rather than creating duality and say, we have a mind, and here is the objects, and there is subjective and objective. So in a sense that it's really establishing the bridge between this human experience and the nature out there. And it's basically saying that it's not really about the instrumental knowledge, that to really go and learn this, things that as a computer will do well, and then use this one and gain power and control over nature. So it is all about how you can make sense of nature through the mind, in a sense that basically phenomenology will say that mind and nature are connected to each other. It's very holistic way of looking the reality. So phenomenology is the key to gain meaning and certainty. And I will say as well, and I think the certainty part that mostly is my emphasis perhaps, knowledge through relating everything to the self, how really you can link to the self and the conscious self, then you can basically, have such understanding. So in this regard, basically an analogy will become very important tool of cognitive learning, meaning that some educator will say that there is no true learning without analogy. So we as a human being, we can only understand through analogy. Phenomenology will say that, yeah, that's true, because mainly your understanding is nothing but you're conscious of something. So in that case, you can only understand through the self. So which means that you can understand everything as you connect them or relate them to the self. And therefore, analogy in a way that's really relating what you see out to what you have through the self experience. So therefore, analogy becomes very important. Again, the second part is, I think we already covered some concept. I just want to know how much time I have it, by the way. You're tracking the time?
Yes, you have 15 minutes left.
15 minutes. Okay. So we'll quickly review. We already covered some concepts, and so we'll review some of them and very quickly, and then reflect a little bit on Ana, and then we can floor for discussion and based on that. So again, intentionality is very important. Technology is one of the concepts that's basically you always, through the intentionality, your conscious is directed towards some things. And the other one is the life world, is the world of lived experience, is a very key concept of phenomenology. So in a sense that, and I find this one is also very interesting in Nursi. So in a sense that, it's not that we have one physical world and we all share this world. No, actually, we all build our own world within this world, meaning that everyone have their own world based on what they call the world of lived experience. So, and how you experience the things and how you make sense of the things and how you, again, build your understanding of the thing. That's basically, and I put this one as a worldview, that's basically, that's become a background on which all other things appears as themselves and become, you know, meaningful to you. So you give meaning to something based on, against the life world. And again, the life world is the concept that, you know, Husserl used a lot, and again, you see in Heidegger, but I kind of think that life world is really the worldview that you establish, through which that you see the world, or you see everything in life. So that's important concepts again. So in the essential part here is that kind of look at life not as a stated things, basically it's a dynamic things. Therefore, it's when you read particularly Heidegger, it's not about, you know, to be something, it's becoming something, meaning that the whole life is always basically, you know, it's nothing but a journey of becoming something. So in the sense that we have such, you know, a potential, that we are unleashing our potential and we are working through the experience. We're going towards somewhere. We're trying to be something, or becoming. That's, again, becoming means the dynamic things. But we are, in a way that we are being in the world. We use Heidegger concept, which basically acting with awareness and responsibility and freedom within a context of a given world condition. So we can't really separate ourselves from this, let's say, this given world as well. And that, so in a sense that they will say is that you need to, bracketing is the concept that you need to suspend this, let's say, this preconception, or they will say everyday understanding, a theory or belief, and habitual mode of thought to really penetrate into what is behind what you perceive. So that's bracketing is another concept. They will use this one, or another concept is I think called epicor. That's basically against that when you suspend this preconception and try to have access to the meaning behind what you experience. So electricity is one of key concepts in Heidegger. I think it's worth to really have the whole session on Heidegger, and I know Alparslan Hocam is an expert on that one. I will be very, I think we'll be very happy to see if Alparslan Hocam can make a presentation to get certain concepts from Heidegger, to see how studying Heidegger might help us to understand certain idea in Nursi. Somehow I feel there is really a great connection there. So I have in slides several about Heideggerian idea, but I'm going to skip them given the time limit. And I really suggest that hopefully, sure, I said that if Alparslan Hocam agree that he, you know, a presentation for us and help us to really, you know, see how we can have better understanding of Nursi through perhaps certain, you know, Heideggerian concepts and ideas. So again, that the essential in phenomenology is the meaning, and meaning is basically the relationship between the transcendental ego and what you experience out there. And so again, the idea here is that we can see how we can go beyond what appear to us. And again, those being toward that's from Heidegger. I'm going to skip that one. Transcendental ego, we already mentioned that, and the concept is quite, even though it's the same concepts in Kant and Husserl, that you can see that different meaning to that, and we already discussed, and there's further discussion on that one. You can look at yourself as later on. And again, in Heidegger, you'll find Dasein, and I will kind of think that's really transcendental ego. I will say, I don't know, so like similar to spirit, but for some reason, I prefer to use Dasein. And again, I'm going to skip this part. And ontology, phenomenology, mainly linked to Heidegger. Being in time again is Heidegger, meaning of being in again Heidegger. I'm going to skip that. So let's have just a few minutes on some reflection on Ana. I already, you know, refer some of them. And as I mentioned, that's basically in these books that Alparslan Hocam referred to. That I have the whole section mainly dedicated that one. The excerpt I sent it to you is basically just a few pages from that book on the discussion. But I think it is, again, it's based on my understanding of what I read from phenomenology. And as I mentioned that when we send the message to everyone as well, it is, I think it's open for discussion. It's not like you know, something that's settled. It's not clear, and it's very deep. I think it's worth of discussion to discuss, to see how we can relate and this is this phenomenology. So the way I look at it is basically, in my understanding, that when we read Nursi, that we can, and I call it two languages with one single letter. The letter is against Ana, and in that case, you know, Nursi says elif, you know, basically this elif or I is a one letter for two language, that one will call it Manais language, one is Manai harfi language. And the essential part is, in this case, Nursi is, and we know that's basically there's, you know, we already mentioned intentionality and Nia. In Nursi's understanding that in Mesnevi Nuriye, that four important concept, and Nursi defined it that it took him 30 years of his education and 40 years of his life to really have such understanding of those four concepts. And in my reading of Nursi is basically, that's not an exaggeration. It's, yes, it took him, you know, 30 years or 40 years of his life to came up with those four essential concepts. What did he do after that? And I will say that he spent the rest of his life to mainly practice and push those four concepts. So in a sense that, you know, when we try to really understand that the core ideas, the core approach of Nursi, we find out that those four concepts, Manai, Harfi, Ismi, Niya, and Nazar are essential concepts. So in this regard, the Manai, so even the very order of that one in the Mesnevi, that is first start with Manai Harfi. And I think he starts with Manai Harfi because he thinks that Manai Harfi is the default one, is what you're supposed to have it. And when you, if you're not really exposed to the Manai Ismi, but the Manai Ismi comes later because that's what you really gain through the culture and through the education or through the parents, whatever. And in this case, it's, you know, it seems like Nazar, basically we can connect to the Nazar to Manai Harfi and Manai Ismi, therefore we can reduce those, again, I think we can reduce those four concepts to three concepts, because Nazar is mainly is either Manai Harfi Nazar or Manai Ismi Nazar. So in a sense that, you know, so it's all about Niya and Nazar. So Niya, what I see, I relate Niya to intentionality. And in this case that basically that you have this Ana and an ego, or transcendental ego, I call it, that basically transcendental ego with this intentionality, with Niya, directed towards something, either through Manai Harfi or through Manai Ismi. So in that case, if you look through the Manai Harfi, that basically you can see, you basically see the true meaning or the ultimate reality behind what you perceive. If you look through the Manai Ismi, is you going to ascribe them to, let's say, to their appearance, to their cause, or so you can't really go beyond, in this case, the shadow, to understand the ultimate, you know, reality behind that. So in this regard, that again, we mentioned the life world and world views, and Nursi use this, it says that everyone sees the world in their own mirror, and everyone in this world has their own particular world. So that's particular world is, again, is basically, it's very similar to this, you know, phenomenological idea of that how you make your own world based on your understanding or conscious experience of what is out there. So, and Nursi, I think when we read we see that in many places he speaks about certainty. And like, let's say in one place says, does all of those show with the certainty of 2 times 2 equals 4, that everything is under direct control of the maker, and this amazing palace and all of this strange universe. So in a sense that, so he's talking about knowledge that we say ghaib, the creator, but he will actually refer to the certainty of, let's say, 2 times 2 equals 4. So in this case, the question is, how can we really reach such certainty, and particularly when talking about something that's not seen to you? So in my understanding, that he basically is talking about the certainty gained through the transcendental ego, through the Ana. So in this regard, that when you really look at it, we can see that from Nursi's perspective, that the Ana is basically a key given to us, that through which we can understand everything. And if we really, with one condition, if we understand Ana, and we'll say that Ana itself is a key, but Ana is also locked in another box. And so first you need to unlock itself, and then when you unlock it, that you can really use the Ana and understand everything else. So, and how you will do that, like one example, you mentioned is that, let's say, when you reflect on, let's say, an house, you say, like, I am the owner of this house, so too is the creator, the owner of the universe. So with its partial knowledge and transcendent self may understand his knowledge, and with its small amount of acquired art, it may understand the originated art of glorious maker. For example, the eye says, I made this house and arranged it. So someone else must have made the universe and arranged it, and so on. And thousands of mysterious states and attributes and perception which make known and show to a degree all the divine attributes and function are contained within the I, or within the, again, what is I here? When we look at the very definition, is really, his definition is, we say, is Alif, is a conscious. So it's basically, my understanding is really referring to this transcendental ego, that through which that we can penetrate to the reality. But the essential part in Nursi here, Nursi will say that we need to use I as, he will say we need to use I as a wahid qiyasi, which basically means that we can use the experience of the transcendental ego as wahid qiyasi to access, to understand everything else out there. Now, I think, am I done with the timing, Alparslan Hocam?
How long is it?
Yes. Alparslan Hocam?
It's the future. Affirmation of transcendental.
Yes. Necati Hocam, time finished. If you wrap up in 5 minutes, then we can go on to the question answer session.
Yes, I think that will summarize. So in the sense that, what is the difference? So I think there are concepts in Ana that you can directly link to the phenomenological concept. What I see, the similarity and differences as follows. So I think that, like phenomenologists like Husserl, Nursi will put the transcendental ego at the center of understanding. They will put also the transcendental ego at the center of certainty. The difference, the way that you can reach the certainty, you will say that you need to do wahid qiyasi. So wahid qiyasi is that basically, since you are only sure about what you experience through the conscious self, then in this case, when you see, let's say, in a building, and then you experience that how the building is made, then you again, like everyone else, has such understanding of a building, let's say a building, in this case, when you see, as a builder, there must be knowledge, there must be again power, there must be again reason behind that, wisdom behind that. His argument is that, okay, as long as you have such first person understanding of a building, that you can basically use this as a wahid qiyasi and reflect on the planet Earth as an elegant, giant, and in every way more, much perfect building, and then say, for sure, that as I know with certainty, there must be a maker of, let's say, an apartment, and for sure, I know that there must be a maker of this planet Earth as well. So he will tell us that, your certainty is always has to come through the self. And in this case, that one would say that you need to basically, when you reflect on the external world, you have to always internalize, in a sense that you have to always relate to the self. That's the way for you to really, who say, do not stay in afaq, means in out there, to bring to basically enfus, because in enfus means that when you relate to the conscious self, that they can give you the certainty, and you can easily gain yaqeen from that. Now, what is the difference? Why, let's say, if that's the case, why, one question I had it, why, let's say, Heidegger, Husserl, they couldn't really get to the same point as Nursi get it? I think the essential differences here is that Nursi really also help us to understand the self itself in terms of the ultimate nature of self. And you don't really see this that much in, again, you see in Heidegger to a certain extent, you don't see in Husserl at all. So, and basically Nursi will say, okay, first you need to be the conscious of self. That comes from this very famous hadith of man arafa nafsahu faqad arafa rabbahu. So in a sense, you need to really first reflect on the self. Nursi will say, if you reflect on the self, yourself, you will understand your true nature is made of absolute impotence, absolute needy. So you are, say, so once you understand in a sense that you are absolutely impotent and absolutely in need of anything, then now you will say, okay, so even though, let's say, it seems like as if I am the one speaking, but when I reflect, it's feeling I can claim ownership over this very act of speech, because I don't know even how it happened in the brain. I don't know really, I can't claim that I'm speaking. So, and therefore the speech is not mine. The mind is not mine because I don't have control over it. And Nursi will say, look, the very simple thing that you claim that you can control it is eating and drinking. But when you really get, a piece of bread in your mouth, you don't have any idea what happened after that. So which basically will say you are very impotent, powerless. You cannot even feed yourself. So in this case, I think it's the key difference in Nursi that Nursi is very, certain on his absolute impotence and his nature, the nature of self. And then once, because in Nursi's idea is that once you really have such true understanding, then when you reflect on others, you say, if I can't do this, if this is not my work, obviously the tree cannot do that, and obviously it's not, DNA cannot do that, and obviously the seed cannot do that. So in this case, Nursi's understanding, the mistakes begin with the misunderstanding of the self in terms of really giving or assuming certain things in terms of power and knowledge, that as if you are you are doing something, and then you start to really give the similar things to the other as well. And I think that's what I see the essential difference between phenomenologists and Nursi, because even though I see there are a lot of similarity, but I see that Nursi is really took it further and help us to really understand on the very essence of the self itself. And then once you convince on that one, and Nursi will say, you don't really, and it's one of very interesting things, he will say, you don't really need to intend to be humble. So if you intend to be humble, that means you claim you have something, and therefore now you try to act as if it's not yours. So you say, no, it should be natural in the sense that you don't have anything anyway. So in a sense that you can't be arrogant because nothing belongs to you except, he will say, the shortcoming, the mistakes that you commit. And that's, I think, the main difference that I see in Nursi versus the others. But I think with that, we can end it here, and then we can floor for question or discussion. Again, really, this is, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's like, as a graduate seminar, as a student, I'm presenting, and I really fully respect most of you in terms of your expertise in the area, and any mistake or shortcoming or any things that you really disagree, feel free to express, and we'll be more than glad to learn from you all. And again, the intention is to just really I see that something out there is valuable for everyone. And I know mainly this belongs to philosopher in the philosophy, but I think it's really valuable for everyone. So for that reason, that I thought that would be worth to really bring into our attention and try to see how we can read and understand Nursi with this concept and make some connection if there is any.
Thank you very much,
Okay.
Necati Hocam. This was a very good presentation, and especially, those who come from philosophy background, as soon as you read Ustaz, the treatise of Ana Risalesi, the first thing that comes to our mind is phenomenology. So let me start with my question first, but I don't know how to get, not much experience with this online business. I don't know how to get the questions because Hakan, I called him to open up the chat so I can send messages to everyone to receive, questions, or, if they could send me through chatting that I have a question so I can direct them to you. But the first thing that I would like to ask is, can we consider Ustaz's analysis of human self a phenomenological approach? So if so, and how, if you can say something on this, and then we can go on. I think Yunus Hocam wants to ask a question, as I can see.
I also want to ask a question.
Okay, good. I will put in order. First my question, and then Yunus Hocam, then we'll continue that way.
For the chat section, I think Necati
Hocam, I don't think, yeah.
Necati
I don't think it's gonna be fair, I just, as I mentioned, don't put me in the hot seat. So I want to, it might be better to really, get your own ideas as well on that. We have discussion on that. So
yes.
Obviously I can give, some answer to question, but I think it will be, I don't want to give the impression as if I'm an expert and here now, everyone asking, I really, as I mentioned, it's not the sense of being humble, it's true. And I really respect the expertise of, someone like you on that one. And therefore I really appreciate if you all also bring your perspective into the subject, that we can just have discussion on that one, really. But again, I will do my best. Grace of Allah to reflect on whatever question everyone bring, questions, and with the question.
Necati Hocam, could you enable the chat? Could you enable the chat so that we can write questions?
As Yunus Hocam will proceed to ask the question, you please enable the chat so we can ask questions. You can check through that and you can reply to the questions.
Okay.
Okay. Shall I ask a question?
Yes, Yunus Hocam, go ahead, please.
Okay. Now, to understand the true nature of something, we have to relate it to divine names, Esma. And Ana, or self. What divine name is it related to, or names?
Evet, Necati Hocam, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Yunus Hocam, that's too hard. Yeah, which divine name could be? I think so. Perhaps because again, Ana here, really look at it, it's a unifying thing that basically connecting everything else. So in a sense that I don't want to say that's like maybe, the unifying, we know unifying name, right, for Allah, right? So in a sense that's basically unifying all other name. I don't, again, maybe you can relate to parents to certain, maybe you can relate in, I think what is really Ana? So it's like the way that they define it is a unifying experience through that one, and everything goes through Ana eventually. And so, and if you, so in that case, I think if you look at the names, that you might see some names as somehow unifying all other names, and all other names are related to that one. Maybe, again, that's why I thought that's first thing came to my mind. Maybe Lafzullah, Allah himself, that's name maybe can be perceived through, because eventually when you really look at it, again, when you look at in the Quranic story, that when Pharaoh says, I am God, this is I am God here is that claim.
I have lost the audio.
Yeah, we lost everything actually. The picture also. Probably he has problems with his internet connection.
Or maybe the question was too hard.
The chat is still disabled. I think it was enabled only for Necati Hocam yourself.
Yes, that's all. If he comes back to life, I will ask him to appoint Hakan again as host so he can arrange all these things.
But if I can ask one more thing, then I will not ask any more questions. Maybe others also can respond. What is the connection between Ana and active agent in philosophy, agency? Is it the same thing or are they different? Maybe you can answer, any one of you.
Well, I don't see any relation between the two, except, active agent. When we say that in philosophy, we consider that, sufficient cause, to use the Aristotelian term, namely the Ana or the ego, the self, as an acting agent. That's all I understand.
But the active agent, it has the causal power, right?
Yes.
And Ana, well, in the same parallel.
Yes, Hakan?
Yes, Necati is here. Welcome back.
Yes, sorry, that was, yes.
May I have my question?
Yunus Hocam asked very difficult question, therefore even cannot, yes.
May I have my question?
Yes, please go ahead, Ibrahim Hoca.
Necati, thank you very much. I really enjoyed your presentation, especially you presented us a very good summary of epistemology in Western history from Plato to Heidegger and Husserl. But I could not make any sense why you didn't tell anything about the intellectual legacy of Nursi, the epistemological and philosophical background of Nursi discourse. Even as you know, Nursi says, I have mentors and masters like Rumi, like Ghazali, and also Imam Rabbani, even Ibn Arabi. When we look at Nursi's terminology, especially about Ana, about Esma al-Husna, and about Nafs, we can see he borrowed a lot of things from Wahdat al-Wujud tradition and also from Tasawwuf tradition in Islamic intellectual history. But he makes some, very new things in these concepts. He puts his stamp on them. But I don't know if you assume we all know this, or you just, what is your reason? You don't say anything about, you just even you just fly on the European land. Or if it is no flight zone on Islamic history of intellectual history, you just always fly on the European landscape. You didn't mention any Islamic scholars. It is on purpose, or there's a reason for that? Thank you.
Yeah, I think very good question, and I think when you look at phenomenology, actually almost all of those subjects, when you look at it, those are perhaps debated in depth by some Muslim, thinker and philosophers as well. So you can perhaps trace and link them as well. But I think the subject for us was to really can relate to phenomenology and to understand within Western phenomenological concept, because again, I think that phenomenology now, particularly if we're going to speak to the world and to the Western world, I find out that phenomenology can be very helpful language through which we can speak to them. So for that reason, that I thought that it will be an important thing for us to pay attention to that very relatively new discipline in the West, and really engage in dialogue with modern science and the modern world through those concepts. And I think that is what you mentioned is absolutely very important, very relevant. And I think that perhaps we can have the whole session to see how those phenomenological concepts can be also traced to, or epistemology and phenomenology can be understood within Islamic, let's say, Kalam tradition. And I think that we can go, different scholars and look at those as well. And again, as you saw, even I wasn't able to cover what I was planning to cover. If I had delved into this part as well, I think could have been, way difficult for me to manage. But I first certainly agree with you. I think it's very important to look at it, to not ignore that side of the picture. It will be really misleading in this regard. But this is just again one hour presentation.
Yes, any other comments or questions?
I have a question, Abbas Hocam.
Okay, Ahmet Hocam, buyur.
There are some questions in the chat. Some questions in chat box.
What is the merit
there are some questions in the chat box as well. Don't forget this as well.
Okay, good.
Yeah, this is a verbal question. What is the merit of putting Nursi into the orbit of phenomenological legacy or tradition? What is the benefit of this perspective? And the second one, is there any legitimate place left for, objective, universal, certain, although tentatively, scientific knowledge? Can you have what is the phenomenological perspective of modern scientific knowledge? So we end up with what at the end? If you have, if everyone has its own world within the universe, so how do you have a transferable language? Thank you.
Good.
Yes, please.
Yeah, very. I think those are two very important questions. Can I address them? Okay. So the first was the merit of phenomenology or studying Nursi within phenomenology. I think it's really all depends on how we understand Nursi. If self, the concept of self or Ana is very important, or the most important concept, then I think if phenomenology is the study of self, and the self is basically, in this case, I think looking phenomenology, I will say, will be very helpful to understand Nursi, to understand what Nursi means. And I will argue that when I read, Husserl and Heidegger, and then when after studying phenomenology for, I will say, almost 3 years, then when I read Ana, it really expands my understanding of Nursi and helped me to see what Nursi means and to basically, get a deeper understanding of his concepts. But it doesn't mean that, just I link to Nursi to phenomenology and just thinks Nursi is a follower of Husserl. No, nothing like this. And actually, that means there are overlapping, there are some differences, and I think that there are certain goes way beyond but I think it is very important to pay attention to phenomenology and to see what Nursi will offer to enhance our phenomenological understanding. And I don't see any problem. As again, if we think phenomenology as a discipline, like let's say any other field within science, then I think again that's the question of why we should study, let's say, physics and chemistry is no different than why we should study itself, because about human beings, about humans, how we really perceive and give the meaning to the things. And I think phenomenology really provide very conceptual framework through which that we can enhance the debates using Nursi's understanding. That's again my understanding. I could be wrong on that one. The concept of objective knowledge and science, I think that of course it's Heidegger will say that Heidegger had a question about technicity. He will talk about technology, and in Heidegger's words, here's what he will say. Heidegger will say, look, we all focus on this instrumental knowledge. It's all about counting. It's all about algorithm, and we'll learn how to really decode this, let's say, the equations and utilize them to gain power, to make weapons. But he will say this is not what we are after it as essence. And he will say, and I remember one thing, he will say that he used to really think that one day this weapons is going to destroy humanity because we can use this atomic bomb and destroy humanity. But then he said he later realized that the technology or this technical mind or instrumental knowledge in science, he says, they turn out into the robots that really kills us humanity, that what really makes us human, to be human, is the meaning that we perceive through this experience. While we forget about this, that we become like a really machine, that we're just looking to the world to see how we can calculate and how we can develop better tool and to just, again, to gain power and pleasure. He will say that's really not the things that can, make human to be human, because human is all about giving meaning to what they experience. So for that, I will say phenomenologists will say that, modern science is all about instrumental knowledge, is descriptive. And in this case, it is useful in terms of giving you tool, but it has absolutely no how to give you the meaning. And therefore, in a sense that I see phenomenology emerge as a way to find a solution to the meaning crisis in a modern times, in the sense that because nihilism or everything's eventually through the reductionist materialism become ultimately meaningless. So in that case, phenomenology is trying to see whether they can somehow inject the meaning into the human experience. So for that reason, and I think again, that's not being against the instrumental knowledge, not saying that you should not be an engineer and you should not learn how to make a car and airplane, saying that this is not everything that you are born for or you should be after, and you should actually, and phenomenologists will say that your primary job perhaps is to see how you can make certain sense of what you experience in life. And that's, I think it's very, again, valuable enhancement of our understanding going beyond this instrumental knowledge in modern science and technology.
Okay, I would like to read Colin's question. Ustaz is not a phenomenologist in the Western philosophical understanding of the term. Essential difference is that Ustaz Nursi uses self in order to negate the self. Philosophy invests no time or energy in this. If anything, philosophy wishes to bolster and strengthen the ego, not to self-abnegate or move towards fana. So this is a comment I think you want to reply.
I think I will wholeheartedly agree with that. That's why I mentioned that I think toward the end of my presentation, that's really the difference between the Western phenomenology and Nursi's understanding of phenomenology. So therefore, it will be wrong to consider Nursi as a phenomenologist in the Western sense, But I don't see anything wrong to say that Nursi, utilize phenomenological methods and approach, but he goes beyond them and he sees their mistakes exactly as Colin Abe mentioned in their understanding of the self. And I think that can be done within phenomenology. And now you can call this one maybe a new type of phenomenology, because we say pure phenomenology, transcendental phenomenology. I call it Tawhidi phenomenology, in a sense that I don't see any problem to really call it that way. But I agree that we need to make sure that we don't really take it this as if Nursi is a phenomenologist, and this is within the Western phenomenological understanding.
Yeah, there is another related question by Mustafa Tuna. Do we know if Nursi read Husserl? If not, what precedents can we identify in the Islamic tradition itself to which we can relate his ideas about Ana? Could Nursi and Husserl be sharing some of those precedents?
I think, again, that's a very good question. And I think that when I read, let's say, David Hume, I had similar question as well. But I think the idea of really how those things are all connected, I really think there are many Western ideas that eventually you can trace back to the Muslim world. And we know that right now, Western scientists are accepting or acknowledging, at least some of them acknowledging that they get a lot from, through the Andalus in that case. So I really think there are, like when I read it, I remember when I was reading David Hume, and I was like, when the example even he was mentioning, saying, how this guy knew why he mentioned the same example that Ghazali will mention, that when he talks about whether the fire can burn the the object, is this really the fire come from the power come from the fire or not, because he used the cotton again an example and then talk about and the same things in mentioning Ghazali. So there are many other examples why you will mention the same example. So I think that's perhaps a subject for someone else to really look at the history of thought to see how they are connected. But I certainly think that you can trace them to see how the Western and Eastern's ideas somehow historically overlap or connect or affect each other. And I don't really think that you can really separate and as if they are each evolving their own island. I think there are really a very strong connection between them. Now, so Nursi is, again, did he really Nursi? Did he, when I read Hegel as well, I said, did he read Hegel? It's amazing. There's the concept of that Hegel has is very, somehow there are a lot of similarity with Nursi will have. But I think, again, I don't know, given to all things that we know, Nursi read some Westerns, resources as well. But I don't think it would be right to say Nursi was like us to really engage in this scholarly research of those Westerns, text and had master on that one and try to develop. I mean, I spent, let's say, 2-3 years to read something. I don't think Nursi had such reading of phenomenology. And when he established and he wrote his concept of Ana. So, and that's, but again, how come they end up to have such overlapping? And I think we can talk about universality. That could be the sign of really that we can say there could be universal, truth out there that everyone they can study and penetrate into that one. And that's when eventually when you see, okay, they're describing the elephant. Yes, elephant is elephant. Yeah, but somehow the description of, the ears by one person in one place can overlap with others because the underlying reality that everyone is trying to understand is same. I think, at least that's what we believe. So therefore, I think, again, I don't know whether there's such, interconnection between them, but I think we should not be surprised when we see similarity at the end.
Okay, there is another good question, Nasrin Ruzati. Can the concept of divine spirit within the human self be explained in relation to Ana? I think there is also an indication here to the famous verse, وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي, as far as I understand the question. So we would like to see your reply to that.
But again, we know the answer in Quran about the ruh as well, right? so when they asked the Prophet about the ruh, he said we have given you very little about it. So it didn't say we didn't give you anything, but it says we have given you a very little about that. So, but I think again, Ana, ruh, qalb, nafs, all other Nursi will talk about thousands of lataif, they are all well connected to each other. Now, what is the exact connection? What is the relationship between them? I think that's really very, very, the only thing I think we can say is they are well connected to each other. That's not something different. So Ana is not, there is no Ana without Ruh, okay? So the question is that, where is the Ana within the Ruh? And what is Ruh? Is it Ruh like a body that has a different, body part, the one you can call it Ana? Or Ruh is the unified things that again is a part of it, is this conscious. Again, I think that could be debated, and I don't know. It's beyond my ability to really get the full picture of the human, internal body with this, with the ruh and other faculty. But in my reading of Nursi, they are all well connected to each other.
Yes, there are some more comments, in the chat section. Hopefully. Hakan is recording these also, the chat will be there. So I think we can see later on. If anybody else wants to ask any question, most welcome. We still have 10 more minutes to go.
Yeah, I would like to ask a question.
Yes, Dr. Farid.
Yes, thank you very much, Necati. I really enjoyed the presentation. I want to take you to task for the claim that Nursi is using a phenomenological method. If you make that claim, obviously you need to show that he is using the method of phenomenology. And in your presentation, you mention, and it's of course well known that one of the core features of phenomenology is this suspension of the natural attitude. It involves bracketing, it involves reduction, and so on and so forth. Now, are you claiming that this is also what Nursi does in his argumentation, in his method? Are you? And I think when you make that claim, you need to show, you need to illustrate how Nursi does that. I think otherwise, we may remain at a superficial level where there appear to be similarities, but they're actually not very similar. So that's one question. The other question has to do with something you mentioned in the paper, but maybe you did not mention in your presentation. You said something about the negation of the self. The self is not real. Now, what I want to ask you is, what is the implication of this view that the self is not real? Is the implication not that therefore free will is not real, therefore choice is not real, and even faith therefore is not real? So I think that needs to be clarified. And related to that, in your paper, you mentioned that towards the end of the paper, you say that the self perceives itself as the self perceives itself as signified with absolute impotence and dependence. It does not claim any ownership over its actions. The self, you say, you're saying that this is the proper understanding of the self, that it does not claim any ownership over its actions. Now, what I want to suggest is that, this may be at a theological level, but in the world that we actually inhabit physically and socially, economically, and so on, we do act as sovereign selves. It is only because we act as sovereign selves that we do what we do. Protecting ourselves, through physical distancing because of coronavirus, going to the doctor, when we have an ailment, going for an operation, believing in the cause and effect between a medication or a cure and, between a medication and a cure for illness and so on and so forth. We take action. We believe in the self as sovereign in that sense. Of course, all of that, if you are a religious person, whether a Muslim or a Jew or a Christian, if you're a religious person, you believe in that acting self that has an impact on his or her destiny within the context, of course, of a religious worldview, within the context of, of omnipotent God and all-knowing God and so on and so forth, which is not the same thing as saying that the self is not real. So I wonder if you could, clarify those points.
Okay, very good question. We need another 1 hour to go over them properly. I will try to briefly mention them. I think yes, the questions that we need to show an example. I think there are many examples. I think Nursi's collection are full of examples that you can show that there's a phenomenological approach, in the sense that the one concept of when he says afaq and nufus, when he say that tafakkur, whenever you make tafakkur, whenever you have contemplation, that you need to really do the nfusi contemplation. I consider the nfusi contemplation is a way of relating everything to the self. And basically, in this case, Nursi will say that afaki contemplation is the one that's like a, baseless ocean that you can get lost on it and try to do the nfus. So I will say that he will say, if you want to reach certainty and drive, assurance in your reflection, you need to relate to the self. So when you read, let's say, Ayatul Kubra, I think you will see full of examples, starting from actually, I can start from the very first word and go word by word to show how Nursi used the phenomenological approach. So again, as I mentioned, when you talk about phenomenology, it's all about relate to the self. How you relate to the self is analogy. Analogy in the sense that when Nursi will talk about something, let's say in the very first word, he will say, look, it's when you look at it, he will use the concept of bostan. He will look at the concept of, let's say, cheshmeh, that for the cow. And so in a sense that he will say, this is basically, a cow is like fountain. Why? Because you have understanding of what does fountain mean. And now that you turn on the fountain and get a water, and you turn on the cows and get a meal, but you understand that the water comes through fountain, but does not come from a fountain. Similarly, you should understand that milk comes through cow, but does not come from cow. So in a sense that, so it's like let's say when he talks about the ocean in the, let's say in Munajat, when he reflects on the earth and ocean and everything, he'll say, ocean is like a buhar kazan. It means that it's like a big, and he will say it's a pool. He will say it's a big place that in which that the water are boiled, and then you get, so I think his use of analogy always, that relating something out there to what we know through our own experience, to me that is, I see this ones as a sign of phenomenological approach in Nursi's writing. And if that is true, I think in Nursi, everywhere we can see such analogy using very, very common. And as I mentioned in my presentation, that's really analogy. It's all about, to relating what you learn new to what you already know through your own experience. Then you can basically, when you think about the sun as a lamp, you already know what does lamp mean. Then now you can actually have better meaning or understanding of the sun, and that's again that's what I will say. How he will use that in that. The second one is
sorry,
yes.
Necati, I just wanted to say, I understand the point about Nursi's use of analogy, metaphor, allegory, and so on, but that using those devices alone doesn't constitute a phenomenological method, because the use of these tools, they're used in all kinds of methods, in literary methods and many other methods. So those alone do not, would not define Nursi's approach as phenomenological, I think.
Again, it really depends on how we define phenomenology. So my understanding of phenomenology is basically, it's all about understanding this experience or the experience of the transcendental ego, meaning that how you're becoming, so your knowledge is always of being conscious of some things. So knowledge is not really some things that you store in the mind and you just recall it. It's not that. It is when you become aware. Now I see your picture on my computer. I'm aware of your existence. That's, I have knowledge of you. That is the knowledge from phenomenological perspective. So in that case, basically, if we look at it, is if all knowledge is directly linked to the conscious self, so, and the conscious self becomes essential for the meanings that we ascribe to all human experience. So then I kind of see that the way that Ana that played the role, and Nursi, the way he explained it in Ana, and he implemented in other places. So therefore, I really think that it will have been excellent if we can just sit down and read Ana from the top to the end. Because I think that the Ana Treatise itself, when you really read it, the example he mentioned there, and the definition he gave it there, and then when you see how he used this very concept from the Ana in every part of Risala, because that's really become essential for him, then somehow, again, give me impression that his methodology is very, very much phenomenological in this regard. That's, again, I will agree with Colin Abe to really make sure that we do not really label him as a phenomenologist from in a Western perspective, because he has big differences. And the difference is exactly what your question is, that he's saying that self is not real. And it's really what you experience through the self is not the work of the self. And as Colin Abe mentioned, the Western phenomenology is all about to really telling you how you are the creator of your world. So telling you how you are God, basically, okay? So in a sense that is basically, it is the wrong side of Ana. If you remember that Nursi will say that the entire human history can be rooted to the concept of Ana, then in this case, on one side, he will say that there is, again, Nubuwa, and the other side is a philosophy. Then they took all, he will say, one is a Shajarei Tuba, the other is a Shajarei Zakum, and the whole fruit in, up to the hereafter is coming from the Ana. So in that case, the Nursi's difference, Nursi will say that Ana is not real. Now the question is that if it is not real, your question of, we think what we experience is really our work. In other words, we are agents, we are taking an action, and that brings responsibility. Now I think Nursi will say that do not confuse daire esbab and daire itiqad. He has two different concepts. He will say that in daire esbab, we live in a daire esbab in a sense that everything is established within a apparent causal mechanism. You have to obey them when you are living within them. So in a sense that if you want to have if you get sick, you need to go to the doctor. But you need to know for sure that this medicine has absolutely no ultimate effect on your healing. The healing comes from the name of Al-Shafi. But can you get Shifa without medicine? No, you can't generally. You can, of course, but you cannot get it because this is the way that God actually established certain order in this universe. So in this case, since we live in daire esbab, we have to obey these rules or this mechanism or this order and live accordingly. So that, I think that's what Nursi will say, that yes, you are right. We do not negate this part. We live accordingly. We take medicine, we go eat food, we take all the cautious things to protect ourselves, but we still believe with the certainty, everything is under control of God. Everything is an act of God. Everything is from God. Everything's happened through God. No one and nothing else has any, control. So therefore, when people talk about conspiracy, I say there's really from Tawhidi perspective, no conspiracy, because God is in control of everything. He is the one, he is actually the only one which creative power, creating everything. So in that case, then when you look at from Islamic perspective, like when Mu'tazila claim that the shar is from human, no, it's basically we know that Ash'ari will say, no, that's wrong, you can't do that. That's God is the creator of everything. So I think that's part. Now, the question is, so what is belong to us? Do we have irada or riya? That's when you mention. Nursi will say everything belong to him, accept the meli tasarruf within your choice, meaning that your tendency towards something when you make a choice, not your ability to make a choice, but your tendency towards something. Now let's say I choose to, share something with you. That is from you, and that's what makes you to be accountable. But everything else is direct creation of God. That's how Nursi will basically say that, you are responsible because you use the meli tasarruf, your tendency to choose to say, okay, create this one for me. Not even by saying or by thinking, by just leaning towards what is presented to you as a possibilities. So you say this one, you point towards something, he will take you there. Since you pointed with your inclination, you're accountable. That's what I think Nursi will say.
So the self, in that sense, the self is real.
The self, Nursi will say, again, the Ana part, the self, Nursi will say, is actually imaginary, in a sense that it's not the real. So you say maybe that's why, like, if only maybe tasarruf part is real, but that's real that's real, yes, but with absolutely no power. So it's not agent with power. It's just a completely paralyzed agent out there, can only mimic you in terms of expressing what he or she wants. That's all. That's what Nursi will give it to the self. And that part, I think Nursi will say it is real. But beyond that, he will say, no, everything else is not.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And again, very tough questions, but again, I hope.
By the way, Alparslan Hocam is having some internet connection problems, and we are almost to 2 hours for this meeting, mashallah. So if you like, we can slowly say our last comments and we can finalize, or we can have other questions. What do you think?
I think I will really want to hear some, different comments or views rather than questions.
Maybe
again.
Let's make 10 more minutes. Then
Yes.
After 10 minutes, we can finish our conversation today.
Yeah, let everyone to just really express what they think freely. Again, really, this is, because I really, don't want to pretend as if I know the subject. I think everyone's out there knows way better than what I know in many areas. So therefore, it will be very enriching if we can hear from others what they think about it overall.
Okay, any comments?
Can I suggest that everyone, ask the question, make the comment, then Necati at the end will just, give a general answer.
Okay.
Again, question.
Okay, very good suggestion. Yes, we can do like this. I think we can start with Bünyamin Hocam to have a short comment and question, if you have.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I would like to mention some of very important keys in here. Because Ana in Nursi, not capacity of knowledge, but also at the same, but only capacity of comparing. Comparing his capacity with society, comparing his capacity with God. Thus, there is no reality in external world. But I think in the service of knowledge, ilim, and irade, also an irade. But we can read this Ana, ego, in another perspective. If we take capacity of comparing is important, we can say that human being can begin to suffers from ego to ego, from ego to society, from ego to nature, from ego to history, and then from ego to God, also from God to God. That is, in the first instance, he can discover God's existence and then discovers God's attributes and good names. Therefore, there is no clear and strong reason to compare between phenomenology and ego, Ana, but it is very different things. In Islamic tradition, knowledge is very different from secular one, because there are very, very much rich heritage in Islamic tradition in knowledge. We have to start from Ibn Sina, and then Sohraverdi, for example, knowledge of Huzuri, knowledge of Suri, and knowledge of Fili, knowledge of Infiali. Thus, we have to study Islamic heritage in this context, not only in this context, but all contexts. In, for example, nature. You mentioned nature as an element, but there is no clear idea about nature. What is the function of nature? What is the relation of nature with angel? How angel goes to the dimension of atomic world? We don't know. Therefore, we have to study. I am studying in nature in Ibn Sina, in Sohraverdi, in Molla Sadra, and in Nursi to compare each other to reach a concept that reaches God's only creature in cosmos. Thank you.
You're welcome. Very good point. I think what you mentioned is, in this case, like Ana work as a wahidi qiyasi. I think that's what.
Yes.
When you're saying that, the main function of Ana is that way.
Okay.
And obviously, I think the way we study nature, that's very good comment as well. Really appreciate. And I know that you're one of really great scholar working on the Muslim side. Yes.
Maybe you can take notes, and then at the end we will give you a couple of minutes. And you can completely respond.
Perfect. I spoke too much anyway.
Is there anybody else to have comments or quick questions? Faris Hocam.
Assalamu alaikum to everyone.
First Faris Hocam and then Ferit Hocam, yes.
Mine is not a question, it is a request. This presentation was too dense and concentrated. For the next coming presentations, I would like to ask scholars to make a bit distinct and short and brief and precise. That's all. Thank you for everybody.
Ferit Alatas Hocam.
Yes. Yeah, I sort of agree with Faris Hocam that it's a bit maybe too compact, because there's a lot of complex things being compressed into 45 minutes or 1 hour presentation. But I think it's a very worthwhile exercise to demonstrate or to show the phenomenological method in Nursi. But what I would like to suggest is, maybe the next time you do this, if you could choose an object an object to which the phenomenological method of Nursi can be applied. It could be, you know, any phenomenon. It could be religion. It could be modernity, or anything you can, you know, you would like to choose. But choose an object and show in a very methodical, systematic way Nursi's methodical phenomenological approach. You know, just as you described Husserl's approach, that, you know, it requires suspension of the natural attitude, it requires bracketing, it requires, you know, reduction, and so on and so forth. Do the same thing for Nursi, but choose a specific object, and then systematically show how a Nursi, you know, a Nursian phenomenological approach would result in a particular understanding of that object.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Alatas. Any other comment or questions?
Just me?
Mr. Messi? Yes, please, Dr.
I'm
Messi.
just wondering, just to go over, I think someone's already covered it, but to think a little bit more about whether we can equate huzuri knowledge with phenomenological or experiential knowledge. Are they both the same? I think that's something really to have a discussion about by itself.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions or comments? If not, I give the floor to Necati Hocam, just 3 minutes to finalize and maybe to touch some points on these comments and questions. Yes, Necati Hocam.
Yeah, I think again, the answers, yeah, I think to Faris Hocam in terms of the method, yeah, we're learning, inshallah, we can do better, inshallah. I think we need to reflect as a team to see how we can come up with better formats next, inshallah. I think good suggestion. And from Nursi's perspective is that obviously, you know, anything's good that is really from Allah. We need to be grateful for that. Anything really that is really from our nafs, and so we be aware and ask for forgiveness, inshallah. In terms of, yeah, I think the suggestion from Farid Hocam is also very, very good, and I agree with him that we can show it, you know, methodology through the example, step by step, and I think can be done, and I could be really serve very well to really make the case with him. And Dr. Mashid, her questions in terms of huzuri knowledge, I think, is that a connection problem?
No.
Okay, yeah, I think the question of how we can we relate this one to the huzuri knowledge, and I think yes, you can, in a sense that therefore I think you can find a lot connection with you know, particularly Sufi tradition of, you know, gaining direct, you know, internal feeling in their reflection. But I will say I consider huzuri in a sense that I consider that is a way of haqq al-yaqeen. And if you know that certainty, and Nursi used this, you know,